Ladies and gents, welcome back. You're not hearing about this on the mainstream media, and I'm sure you can understand why. This isn't good for the people who are in power. We saw last year here in Canada, the media completely skew the story of thousands of truckers getting together to go to our nation's capital. Now we have millions of people in France protesting measures put forward by the government unilaterally without consulting the people. We have here imagery on the streets of there is literally millions of people out there protesting in France. And well, what is causing this? This is what most people are asking. What's happening? They're not even talking about it. Mainstream media is ignoring this story completely. What is the actual issue here? What is happening in France? And well, let's get into this story here. We have from The Guardian, who is actually covering the story. Democracy is broken. French public divided on pensions and protests. More than 1 million protesters took to the streets in France on Thursday after Emmanuel Macron's decision to force through legislation to rise the minimum pension age last week. And that goes from, I believe, is 62 to 64. The government narrowly survived a non-confidence vote, which would have brought them to an election, which was, the last one was very close against Le Pen, the right-leaning candidate. But somehow the World Economic Forum candidate, Macron, managed to stay in government. But they narrowly survived a non-confidence vote on Monday after invoking Article 49.3 of the Constitution to bypass Parliament for the bill. And this is the bill that will make austerity, essentially. And here's the thing. When a government promises way too much, overpromises what they can deliver to the people, this is what happens when they don't deliver. This is absolutely what happens when they don't deliver. There have been weeks of strikes and protests against the proposal to reform France's retirement system, culminating in outbreaks of violence in some cities during Thursday's National Day of Action. There are 7 people in France to share their views to this article here. One person saying the system is fed by the working population. If the retired population increase and the working population does not keep up, it will pose some problems. I'm not adverse to changing the system, but it should have been done with more consultation. So this is, again, the government not even consulting the people when it comes to these reforms, just outright, again, like I said, making promises for years and years and then not delivering on these promises. The reforms are not fair to people who have physically demanding jobs and women who may take time off work for parenting and will now have to work for longer. It is also unfair for people who started to work at an early age. Why should people who started to work at 18 not be able to retire at 61? Now, in Canada, the retirement age is 65, and I'm sure it will be going up. And many of the developed world, the ages are going up. I know in Japan they have a scheme now because of the shrinking population. To be eligible for retirement, you have to actually do a quasi semi-retirement for a number of years before you can fully retire. And this is what's happening in Japan. But here we are in France again. Here's a thread from More Perfect Union. You might have seen that France seems upset. Strikes, protests, riots. Why the outrage? Well, it all started early this year when President Macron proposed changing the pension system, which would essentially rise the retirement age from 62 to 64. And then there's the rest of the thread here. The proposal faced immediate resistance. Just days after his government announced the plan, hundreds of thousands of people flooded to the streets in cities and towns across the country. And the unions called strikes that disrupted transport, schools, and other public services. But Macron pushed. He insisted that he would alter the pension system and attempt to get it through Parliament. In January, he said, "I will do it with respect in the spirit of dialogue, but also determination and responsibility." In the spirit of dialogue, which is this is hilarious. In the spirit of dialogue, so without dialogue, essentially, that's what that means. But even as he said that riot police were clashing with protesters in the streets of Paris, Macron insisted that the country with an aging population where everyone receives a state pension, pension reforms is the only way to keep the system solvent. And well, you can see again, millions of people are out there. However, unions argue that pensions overhaul threaten hard-fought rights and proposed tax on the wealthy or more payroll contributions from employers to finance the pension system. Polls show most French people also oppose the reform. And in late January, the unions escalated. The CGT, a confederation of unions, represented nearly 700,000 workers, cut power to a swath of wealthy suburbs by the Orly airport outside of Paris. They even briefly cut electricity to the Paris headquarters of some moderate CFDT unions. It's escalating. Some rebuked this radical move, but others called it Robin Hood-esque because the striking militant union simultaneously gave free power to French schools, hospitals, and low-income homes. Needless to say, tensions continued to rise. February saw multiple days of mass strike, with estimates ranging of up to 2.5 million workers on strike in a single day. Transportation, garbage collection, utilities, and educations walked off the job. By March, unions were ready to escalate again. Workers had, by this point, held 8 days of mass protest with millions hitting the streets. Now, crucially, some workers decided to abandon one-day strikes for a rolling, ongoing strike. Most noticeable, the garbage collectors went on indefinite strike, and means trash started to pile up in the streets. Reuters reported on the scene of the streets in Paris. Then, just yesterday, Macron, and this is of the 17th, Macron changed his approach. He had been trying to get the legislation passed through the conventional process, but after massive waves of opposition, he switched his approach, declaring that he would use Article 49.3 of the French Constitution. Article 49.3 enables the government to push a bill through the National Assembly without a vote. Wow, so much for democracy. They always keep talking about democracy as if it's this big thing that they uphold. But as soon as it gets in their way, well, get rid of democracy. That's terrible. It's legal, but it's also seen as undemocratic, of course. And there's a cost. Opposition lawmakers have 24 hours to file non-confidence motion against the government. So here we are with that. Now, this after this scene happened, there was Macron went on the news, and he was seen. He was there to talk about how French people have to, step up and do what they can for everybody and for the good of everyone, right? Well, in this interview, Macron was wearing a super expensive watch, an 80,000 euro watch, and obviously realized how bad that looked. So he took it off under the table so he wouldn't be still wearing the watch, which obviously lends to the fact that he knew what was going on at the time. Now, even Joe Rogan of the Joe Rogan Experience commented on this move and just how bad the optics are there.
One of the greatest examples that's happening right now is this massive protest in France. Massive protest in France. 9 million people on the street. Literally up in arms.
This is about the Social Security change?
Yes. Yeah. Macron in France takes his fucking $80,000 watch off under the table while he's talking to people about tightening up and about how this has to be done. Like, the guy's wearing a fucking find out what watch he was wearing, because you're a watch head. You would like this. But the fact that this dork thought it was a good move to take his fucking watch off under the table. And then there's the protests in Israel. Enormous protests in Israel.
So yeah, Joe Rogan goes on to talk about other protests that are happening across the world, which is absolutely a thing. Now you can see the imagery here, and I'm going to refrain from showing you any of the violence. And let me tell you, there is a lot of violence, and it's being escalated by the police, by the authorities in France. It's it not only escalated, but initiated by the authorities in France. Just the amount of people is insane what's going on there. Now you can see some of the police in their riot gear here in this footage here. This coming from Canada from the Counter Signal. You can find more about their stories there. And people, these are just average everyday people. Like this isn't like professional protester types. This is definitely a revolt of just the average people who've been promised a thing in France. And again, I'm going to refrain from showing you any of the violence because of YouTube. I don't want YouTube to take this down, even though they may, because it seems like there's an embargo on getting this information out there. So this is what I'm trying to do here. Now you can see, again, more images of people out there. This seems to be a trend. James Melville saying, trucker convoys in Canada, farmer protests in the Netherlands, uprising in Sri Lanka, protests against lockdowns in China, protests against government in France. The snowball of people power against authoritarianism is turning into an avalanche. And here we have footage of an actual clash that's happening, and I'm going to stop it before any of the violence actually happens, but they run into a crowd of people, and, well, I guess your imagination, take it away. You can imagine what actually happens here, and you can see that it's being provoked by one side, not the other. And here is another incident where the firefighters have joined the protesters, and the police actually square off with the firefighters here, and, well, there's a clash. And I'm not going to show you, again, any of the violence, but you can see that these are firefighters fighting with the police. Now, France is starting to look a little bit like the everything is fine meme. If you've seen this meme, this is the world right now. But this is a literal everything is fine meme over in France. People trying to dine at a restaurant, just trying to live their lives as this is going down. This is absolutely a huge story. And again, the fact that it's not making the national news, international news, is suspect, to say the least. But hey, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. These are austerity measures that they're taking while still funding other projects like the war in Ukraine and other big things. They're not taking cuts from their own. This is the problem. So austerity always should come first to funding of international things. You take care of your own people as a government before you start cutting pensions and things that you've promised them for their futures. Anyway, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you in the next one. Don't miss tonight premiere with Marty up north. We catch up on all the things that I missed when I was in Japan. Check that out at 9 Eastern live on the channel. See you in the next one. Keep on trucking.